Hello, everyone, and welcome. Happy FilAm History Month. My name is Jess Ju. I am the Director of Programs and Operations at CAPE. And thank you so much for joining us for tonight's CAPE cast. We have an amazing panel for you. I'm still pinching myself that we got these three incredible artists together to talk about movie making and other and their backgrounds and journeys into filmmaking. But before we get started, I just have a few house rules to go over. So we will be taking audience Q&A. So please leave your comments in the chat box, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube. We'll get those, and hopefully we'll be able to get to your questions. We also want to take this time to thank our partners. First, our community partners, Cinema Sala. Cinema Sala is a platform showcasing Filipinx work from the film and performing arts industries. You can learn more about them at cinemasala.org or on Facebook and Instagram. And then our other community partner for tonight is FilAm Creatives. FilAm Creatives educates and advocates for the Filipino American entertainment community and looks for collaborative workspace in order to achieve greater representation and career advancement. You can learn more about them at filamcreative.org or follow them on Twitter and Instagram. And last but certainly not least, Define American. Define American is a culture change organization that uses narrative to humanize conversations about immigrants. And they've worked and consulted on television projects and film projects such as Grey's Anatomy, Superstore, and countless others. And we're so lucky to have the founder and key consultant of Define American with us tonight as our moderator. I'm so excited to introduce Jose Antonio Vargas, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and Emmy Award nominee filmmaker. And he told me to tell you he has not been deported yet. So please welcome Jose Antonio Vargas. Hi, Jose. Thank you so much for coming, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much for having me and for having us. That's just my little joke because, if you're undocumented, you have to have a sense of humor. So when people ask me, like, why are you still here? I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm still here. And what an exciting time to be here, by the way. And thank you so much for joining us. If you would have told me 10 years ago that we would have two really richly textured, incredibly well-told films about the specifically Filipina immigrant experience, and that they would be directed by Filipina American filmmakers, and that the story would be about undocumented Filipinos, I would have told you were nuts. But this is incredible. This is what we have now, is we have two amazing filmmakers, writer-directors, Isabel Sandoval and Diane Paragas, who have done exactly that. And let me just say, since I founded an organization called Define American, I think both Diane and Isabel actually define what it means to be Filipina filmmakers, not only in the United States, but around the world. And I'm just really privileged to be having this conversation with both of them. So welcome. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you so much to CAPE as well for sponsoring and hosting
this. Yeah. Oh, look. We're all Filipinos every day, but today, this month is Filipino American History Month. So I think it's just great that we're having this conversation. And I was reading up, of course, on both of you. I've known both of you. I mean, Diane and I met almost a decade ago now. And I think that was when I first heard about this film. I've been following Isabel's career. But instead of reading your bios and reading the Wikipedia version of it, I'd rather you all just kind of ask both of you your own individual journeys as filmmakers. Isabel, go ahead.
So I was born and raised in the Philippines. I was born in Cebu, just like the character I play in Lingua Franca, Olivia. I finished my bachelor's degree there. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. And then I worked for a year in marketing before moving here to the US, to New York City, where I pursued a master's degree in MBA at NYU. I did not go to film school. But after getting my MBA, I worked for about 2 years with a digital marketing agency, and I decided to take the plunge and make my first film. It was a short called Senorita that I then developed into a full-length feature the following year, which would be my debut feature of the same name, Senorita, that premiered at the Locarno Film Festival. I did not go to film school, and it was a deliberate choice because I had this impression that when you go to film school to learn an art form, you tend to absorb the philosophy and the aesthetic of the teachers that you study under. And I just didn't feel like limiting myself and my development and growth as an artist in that sense. So my film school was really watching as many kinds of films as I get a hold of, art house films, classic films, independent films. And so I ended up making my 3 features. The first 2, although I was already based in New York, I actually went back to the Philippines to shoot Senorita and Apparition. Apparition, my second one, is set in 1971 at the height of the Marcos dictatorship. And it's about a group of cloistered Catholic nuns who find themselves under siege as political turmoil racks, the rest of the country. And after Apparition was released, it was quite well received internationally. It's now considered a contemporary Philippine classic, and it's usually featured in retrospectives of Philippine cinema, the latest one being at the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, in 2017. It was shown alongside films of Brillante Mendoza and Love Diaz. After making Apparition, I transitioned. I had my gender transition, and that's when I wrote and developed Lingua Franca, which I shot in 2018. Lingua Franca is, just very briefly, it's about an undocumented Filipina trans woman who is pursuing a path to citizenship through an arranged green card marriage, and she works as a caregiver to an elderly Russian Jewish lady with dementia in Brighton Beach in Brooklyn. And she becomes romantically involved with the adult grandson of that lady. And he happens to work as a slaughterhouse worker. So,
Thank you for that, Isabel. Diane?
Isabel, I didn't know you didn't go to film school. I also didn't go to film school, which is interesting. So I studied film studies at University of Texas, and I grew up in Texas, and which is kind of the basis of this movie, which is out in theaters right now, Yellow Rose. But growing up, I loved movies, but like a lot of young women, I didn't see any role models who were filmmakers, even though I was making little movies when I was younger. I studied film studies, and I remember quite specifically, I went to this one art house in the University of Texas, and they would show all these foreign films, which I had a voracious appetite for. And the film that probably made me feel like maybe I should be a filmmaker is a movie called Judo, which is by Zhang Yimou, and it starred Gong Li. And it was the first film I had seen with an entirely Asian cast, and it had a different pacing, a different aesthetic. And at the time, I was a painter, still paint, and I play music, but there was something about that film that I recognized as art and as just something transcendent. And I think maybe that was the first inkling in my mind that I might be a filmmaker. But it took a couple more years. I moved to New York. I worked in advertising, and very quickly I became the agency producer there. And I hired this company called You Direct, and I said, look, where they allow the agency producer to direct. And I said, I'm going to hire you for every job as long as you can teach me about how to make films. And so that's kind of my film school, which was kind of, in some weird way, was a hustle. And then from there, I moved on to MTV, where I worked in their marketing department. And then I moved to Hong Kong, where I directed and produced a show for Discovery Channel. And by the way, that show was hosted by Lea Salonga. And that was the first thing I ever directed. And then I came back to New York. I started a production company. Long story short, I made my first, and around that time is when I wrote Yellow Rose.
when I came back, I'd had this experience, and I wrote this script, and I tried to get it made, and it was very difficult. And I did get a producer on right away on the strength of the script, and it just, nobody wanted to finance something like that. So I did put it aside and continued to direct, and made some documentaries, including the film Brooklyn Boheme, which features Spike Lee and Chris Rock, and I co-directed it with my good friend Nelson George. It's about the African-American arts movement, and how this community sort of propped each other up and created the careers of Spike Lee and Chris Rock and Talib Kweli and so many great artists in the 80s. And around that time is, I also I went to the Toronto Film Festival to support a friend's film who was premiering there. And Isabel will know this. When you don't have a film in a film festival, you actually can go see films. So I actually went and saw films, because you never see films when you have a film in a festival. So I saw a film called The Reluctant Fundamentalist. And it was by Mira Nair, who is a hero of mine. I had met her before. And she was somebody I really looked up to, because she had done documentaries and then went on to do narratives, which is what and so I was really interested in the Q&A. And in the Q&A, she said that she had returned to doing a South Asian film, because she had been doing all these big Hollywood movies. And then in that interim of time between her last South Asian film, nobody had made another South Asian mainstream film. And so she said, I realized that I was in a very unique position to tell stories of my own people, because if I don't tell them, then who will? And then I was like, fuck it. I don't care how long it's going to take. I'm going to make Yellow Rose. And the journey was still a couple of years. And I think I met you around that time, Jose. And I just was on that, and it took years, but eventually the film got made and it's out in theaters now. So that's the long and the short of my story.
And I think believed to be one of the first films to be distributed, one of the first films directed by a Filipino distributed by a major Hollywood studio. So yeah, please check it out. It's out in theaters now. Lingua Franca, of course, is on Netflix, and we'll be talking about that more later. But I want to dig deeper a little bit into this, because I'm a journalist who never went to journalism school. So what is that about? What is it about both of you being filmmakers and not have? Is it that we're Filipinos? Were you pressured to go to nursing school or being an accountant or go to the Navy? And you're like, no, we're not going to go do that. I'm going to go be a filmmaker. Can we talk a little bit about that, Isabel? So why not film school?
I guess for me, I like taking the more unexpected, surprising route to whatever my destination is. I feel like by setting up obstacles for myself, it forces me, and that's the same approach that I take to my own work, in that I don't want to take the predictable path or route to, and that's the same way, like with Lingua Franca, for instance, if I may just touch on it briefly.
Please.
Although based on the premise, it feels like a textbook social issue drama, but I use that, kind of boilerplate premise to really showcase my aesthetic and my sensibility that I hope comes across as being distinctive and singular and unique. And also, for me, part of the reason why I didn't go to film school, but instead pursued a business degree is, it really took me a while to really accept that filmmaking can be a grown-up career. I always wanted to have like one foot in the door with a safe professional path. I'm just very lucky and fortunate that my mother, who raised me by herself, has always been supportive of the career path that I've taken. Like when I went to NYU as I was pursuing my MBA, I had two specializations. I specialized in marketing, but I also specialized in media and entertainment. And that's how I got an internship in the international distribution departments of Focus Features, which was then under James Seamus and also Weinstein Company, but that was well before.
You were well before that whole thing. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Scandal. Yeah. And I feel vindicated that somehow the path that I've chosen has somewhat paid off, and Lingua Franca has been received as warmly as it has. So
yeah. Diane?
What was the question?
The question about why not film school? Like, so why that unexpected path?
You know, once again, I didn't think it was an option. And that's partly because I was a woman, maybe partly because I was Filipino. It just didn't seem like an option to me. And only till later on in my career same with Isabel, you know, it didn't seem like a career path. And, you know, as Filipinos, we're conditioned into, so I was at the United Nations. So that was my first job, was actually at the UN. And I studied international relations in China, if anything. That's why I was living in Hong Kong. So
interesting.
It just didn't occur to me. And I've always been creative. I had painting shows in college. I was shown in galleries. I played in a band in high school. I've always been an artist and a creative person, but it just never occurred to me that you could be an artist. And to be honest with you, I feel like only recently do I feel like a filmmaker, you know, because I had a company, and for many years I was doing stuff to support that production company. Even though I was directing things, I was like a production company person, and then a commercial director, which is, you know, it's still directing, but it's a job, you know. And, you know, I have to say, it's really with Yellow Rose that I feel like I really got to say something that is uniquely my voice. And it's very different the way this film has been received. And I really got to spread my wings creatively in a way that I think I hadn't before, in that sort of Filipino sensible way. You just don't go after the big thing. And that's very interesting you said that, Isabel. I really relate to that in many ways.
But what's interesting is watching the film, clearly you both are auteurs. I mean, there was like so many choices in both of these films. Like, I mean, Isabel, I can go on and on about the use of mirrors in the film, right? And it kind of reminded me of Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility. Like, whenever there was a frame thing, it was like, ooh, mirror, like what's going on? And Diane, the use of country music as almost like a metaphor and as almost like a penetration into like what it means to be an American, I thought was just, it was clearly deliberate, but it was the kind of theme and detail that only an auteur could really kind of come up with, right? And I want to say that both of these films have an amazing distinction of being primarily produced by producers of Filipino descent. And was this something that both of you deliberately sought out? I mean, and if so, why was that important as a filmmaker? Diane, then I'll go to Isabel.
That's such a good question, particularly for my film. Part of the reason it took so long for me to make the film is I kept going back to white America and white Hollywood to ask permission to do this film. And they would always be like, who wants to see a movie about a Filipino girl who wants to be, what is this? You know, it just didn't have a market. And that's why I sort of got discouraged for as long as I did, just because I just didn't think there was a place for myself. What ended up happening is I went to Filipino people. My producer, Cecilia Mejia, who I met because I was doing research with the Filipino American Legal Defense Fund. And that's when I met you, or we worked together on that project. Jose, you were in that little film I did about FALDEF. And it was through them that I got to visit detention centers, hear your story, hear other stories about families who were separated, and that became the backbone and the research for what became Yellow Rose. And then I started getting more immersed into the Filipino community at that point, and it was a Filipino American equity investor who gave me money to do the short film, and then from there, ABS-CBN, who is the largest film and television company in the Philippines, supported my film through a competition that I had won, and then more Filipinos came in as equity investors. And because I didn't have to explain the need for a movie like this. They wanted a movie like this. They wanted to see a movie that would play sort of crossover into the mainstream, and that was their goal. And they just supported me. And I'm actually so grateful it happened in that way, because it's us raising each other up. And and you know, like I keep saying this, it's like between you, Jose, Isabel, myself, so many other Filipino filmmakers, we are all out to debunk crab mentality. We want to support each other. We are, my success is your success is my success, and we're really doing it. And it feels, dare I say, like a Filipino movement in cinema. It's happening right now. I mean, look at us. And, you know, Ramona Diaz has an incredible film coming that's out right now as well. And
1,000 Cuts.
It's our time.
Please check it out.
It's our time.
And I love how everybody has their own sensibility. I love that there's no one lane, that you all are creating your own lanes, right? So Isabel, let me ask you, so why was that important to have to make sure that the film is being produced and backed by Filipinas and Filipinos?
Yeah, certainly. And it was also, you know, by design that not only did I pursue Filipino and Filipino immigrant creative partners, but I did not even attempt to try to develop this in Hollywood, because I didn't want to compromise the authenticity, the integrity, and the ferocity of my vision. Because, you know, especially when you have money or creative input coming from Hollywood. I mean, for this particular type of film and its subject matter and its themes, it becomes dumbed down and filtered to pander and to cater to a broader cisgender, you know, white audience. And I wanted to make a film that I can enjoy and people from my community can enjoy. And can really understand and empathize with.
And speaking, by the way, of Filipinas and Filipinos in kind of in the producing rank, I just have to really a big shout out to both Cecilia Mejia and Jeremiah Abraham, I had just been watching them in the past decade and see just how strategic and how resilient they have been. You know, like both of these films and kind of their cheerleading of it has been incredible. So I just wanted to kind of say that. Delving a little bit more in both of these films, in both Yellow Rose and Lingua Franca, the heroines are set against what are typically seen as like white American communities, like honky tonk country and working class Russian Jewish neighborhood in New York City. Can you both elaborate on why you decided to set your respective stories against these backgrounds? Was there like a personal connection to either one of these communities? I know Diane, having grown up in Texas, was that deliberate on your part? I mean, I've been to Lubbock, Texas, and I actually went there a few years ago because the students at Texas Tech University decided to have a contest called To Catch an Illegal Immigrant. And so I tweeted at them and I was like, I'm going to come and I'll talk. Yeah. So why was that deliberate in your part, like setting it against that backdrop?
If that doesn't say it all, I mean, Lubbock is pothole. That says it all. We always had that joke growing up, but I mean, the story emanates from my feeling completely out of place and out of sorts in Texas. And I wanted to take those feelings, and in my case, I just lashed out by shaving my head and wearing a dog collar and playing in a really bad band and being a little punk. But when I thought about what if my character loved Texas, what if she loved the music, and what a sad unrequited love. And it's the beginning of a character that you want to know more about and you can go on a journey with. And that's why I kind of set it in a very white world. And because that was my world. That was how I grew up. It was all white people all the time. And at the same time, which is a big, I talk about you a lot, Jose, in my Q&As, because I talk about allies, and in your book, you talk about the people who often are white, who who become surrogate parents, who show kindness. And there's a bit of controversy around my film, and that I leaned into that at times. But to me, that is the subversive thing to do in these.
That's real. It's real.
It's real. It's real, but it's also, as Isabel says, not the popular thing to do. You could easily feed some red meat of the low-hanging fruit of the redneck, but to show a nuanced kindness is pretty brave in the times we live in, especially when my politics are liberal, when my politics are pro-immigrants. So to show a film that leads with kindness is sort of an antithesis of the days we live in. And there's backlash I see from it because of that. But I stand by it 100%. And that's the America we don't see in the politics of what Donald Trump has, kind of encouraged.
Yeah, I completely agree, Diane, and thank you for addressing that head on. I was seeing a little bit about it, but I was like, guess what? Like, if we don't make films for everybody, then why do we do it? It's
you have to stand by your art. You have to stand by it, and I stand by it. I defend it voraciously,
as you should. As you should. Isabel, by the way, I love that about the film. I feel like, this. I mean, of course, I used to live in New York City, so that kind of, Russian Jewish neighborhood felt so tactile. It felt so real, and of course, the incredible Lynn Cohen, which, if you're a fan of Sex and the City, Magda, right? Like, so I just love seeing her, and this was her last role, right? I think
this was her last roles. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk to me about, like, why that backdrop.
I wanted to make a New York film that was really about immigrants. And one thing that really stood out to me when I first moved to New York is that, especially when you go to the outer boroughs like Brooklyn and Queens, it really shows how much of a melting pot culturally a place like New York is, and that America is made up of immigrants from different countries and of different generations. And say in Brooklyn, it's like when you go from one neighborhood to the next, they each have their own distinct character and identity that they've somehow retained from the countries that they were from. Like I live in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, which is a lot like Williamsburg, and it's now becoming like the setting of Girls on HBO by Lena Dunham. But when you take the train just half an hour down to Brighton Beach, I feel like I'm being whisked off to a different country, and in fact, to a different period, to the Russian Jewish neighborhood. And I think part of it was also, one of my favorite American filmmakers is James Gray, who is Russian Jewish. And he set a few of his films, including Two Lovers, starring Joaquin Phoenix and Gwyneth Paltrow in Brighton Beach. And so I wanted to have this romantic drama that featured two different kinds of immigrants. And the more obvious immigrant, of course, is Olivia, because she's a far more recent one. But Alex is a third-generation immigrant. His family came from Ukraine. Olga, the grandmother, played by Lynn Cohen, came from Ukraine back in the 60s. So.
I actually want to follow up on this because, again, since I met you, Diane, I can't believe I've been doing this work for almost a decade now. So I've done like 1,900 events in 49 states in 9.5 years. I know, it's kind of crazy. I'm not even running for office. And the number one question I get asked, it doesn't matter if I'm in Mississippi or if I'm doing an interview with Bill Maher, right? The question I get asked is, why don't you just become legal? And I love, Isabel, that you added this quote because this sums up one of the most common phrases that folks just do not understand about immigration that people always ask. And Alex, who you noted is a Russian-American third-generation, immigrant, is the one who asked this question. So was that on purpose to kind of show the viewers kind of the nuance of the immigrant story?
Yeah, and kind of to dispel the notion that it's a straightforward and easy, option and path for undocumented immigrants to take, when it's really quite a rough uphill battle, and climb to even explore what options are available for you. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, we partnered with Vilcheck Foundation to actually have a panel discussing what are the possible options for someone like Olivia in her predicament as an option to pursue a path to citizenship.
And what does that look like? I just love, and again, some people can see it as a quote unquote, part of a social justice thing, but it was so organic to their relationship, and it didn't. I love that of it. And Diane, I have to ask you, since you have Lea Salonga and you have, I don't know if I saw Miss Saigon when Eva was playing that role Kim, and of course she's in. Oh my God, I'm blanking out on the Broadway show that was just on Broadway. What was it?
Hadestown.
Hadestown. That's what it was. I can't believe Broadway is still closed right now. So you have these two incredible singers in the movie. And of course, so what was the inspiration behind using country music so beautifully to show the very real, fearful flight of living as an undocumented young Filipina in Texas?
Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of music films in general. Once was a big inspiration for this film. But as far as genres of music that are suited to cinema, I think there's nothing more powerful than country music. The Great Nashville, that movie, Tender Mercies was a big influence on this film. Even as recently as Crazy Heart, there's something cinematic in the melancholy, in the storytelling, in the simplicity of a country song and of country music, and a particular kind of country music that I chose to feature in this movie, which is kind of the old style Americana folk type of music. And there's something earthy, there's something romantic, there's something, of course, distinctly American about it. So that metaphor is, there. But I've always loved this idea of doing a modern Western, which is what I made. And instead of going from town to town with a horse and a gun, she has a bus pass and a guitar case. And sort of that lone figure that John Ford used in his films, The Searcher. We used a lot of shots that were indicative of The Searcher. So there's just something cinematic about country music. And as I was making it, I was very conscious of trying to imagine what a country song would be as a film. And a good country song has to be earnest. It has to be simple. It cannot be, it's not provocative, although I wanted to be provocative, but it's about the authenticity and the simpleness of it. And it's difficult to write a good country song. It's difficult to make a country movie. And I was trying to hit that balance of the tenderness and the simplicity of what makes a good country song. It's always very heartfelt. It's very sincere. So all of those metaphors, and then of course it's the closed type of music. It's the whitest kind of music. It's the most American kind of music that would be closed to this character. So it's not just her trying to find her voice as an artist, but it's also trying to find her place in the country itself. So it just metaphorically, tonally was something I saw very clearly in how I made it and in the subject matter itself.
Got it. Well, and now let me ask both of you this. So it is Filipino American History Month. I'm in California. I'm in the Republic of Berkeley. Here in California, there are about 2 million Filipinos. Like, there are actually more Filipinos in California than there are people in New Hampshire. Right? Let me just repeat that. There are more Filipinos in California shopping at Seafood City, right, than there is the population of the entire state of New Hampshire, right? But in discourse about Asian Americans in this country, Filipinx Americans are often left out of the conversation entirely, even though Filipinx Americans are the second largest Asian American ethnic group here in the United States and have a long history within the United States. I mean, the first Filipinos were in California in 1587, right? The Filipinos in Louisiana teaching Americans how to fish. So what are the steps you think the greater community can take to address this erasure? And I have to say, post Crazy Rich Asians, it's incredible to see Diane, Isabel, Ramona Diaz. It's incredible just to see that Filipino and Filipina creatives are stepping out there. And you have organizations like CAPE, like Gold House, right, that are trying to embrace really a much more pan-Asian identity. But what are the steps the greater community can take to address this erasure? And what are you hoping, both of you, to see in the future? Diane, let me go to you first.
Oh, that is such a good question. You know, I mean, I want to talk about something that's a little bit controversial, I guess, in that.
Please.
In that, you know, in this kind of community of Asian Americans, you know, we're oftentimes left off the list. That there's East Asians, then there's jungle Asians. And and we, you know, we've been left off the group. We've been left aside from the group for a while. And I don't know that that's, you know, I don't know how much that is partly also Filipinos, that we feel kind of outside of that group. There's some of that. And then there's just, you know, some of the other stuff, which, and so that's one thing that, you know, that we are starting to see the larger Asian American diaspora embracing us. But there has been a sort of block to entry in, you know, amongst the Asian Americans. And, you know, I think for Filipinos, we have all, we know people who are very successful. You know, we all had a level of success prior to now. But I think so many Filipinos hide the Filipino-ness. You know, they get to a certain point and we don't talk about it. And we don't want to lead with I'm Filipino. And I think it's time that we lead with being Filipino. It's time that we talk about being Filipino. It's time we be proud of being Filipino and lead with that. And I think we are starting to do that. And, you know, with these movies coming out, with the Filipino food movement, there's pride in our food, in our cuisine, in our culture. We're just coming out and coming into our own. And I do hope the Filipino food movement, I mean, there are just Filipino restaurants and top-notch James Beard restaurants all over the country now. Some of the best restaurants in the country are Filipino. And I hope we start to see that trickle down into these other art forms like film, like television, like journalism, like in all different sectors. So I just think that we've been laying low, we've been set aside, and it's time to be front and center, proud Pinoys.
And by the way, before Isabel answers, let me just shout out Nicole Ponsaca at Jeepney. I think Jeepney celebrates its birthday today. And for me, Jeepney is talk about a milestone, right? I mean, kind of introduce, to me, it in many ways, the success of Jeepney in New York kind of helped kind of spark this Filipino food movement. So shout out to Nicole because we love her. But Isabel, like, I mean, for you, I'm just curious, like what do you make of it? And and when I say that too, because I just remember looking at the first poster of your film, right? When I first saw it, I was like, oops, she's Filipina. Like, it was just very like, ooh, she's Filipina, right front and center. I mean, Diane, of course, yellow rose, right? Like, it's this idea of putting Filipino, being Filipina front and center. So what do you make sometimes of the erasure?
Yeah, I think for me, you know, and I've joked to people that I'm a gold star minority, like not only in this country, not only am I a woman, I'm a trans woman of color, specifically Filipina, and I'm an immigrant. And like this film, for instance, it's very niche because of that. When you think about it, it's about a subjectivity and sense of identity that's very, very particular and specific. And people, creators, for instance, tend to shy away from embracing that otherness so much because they feel that their perspective and their voice becomes marginalized because of that. But I think for me, my approach and my point of view about it is that I've come to embrace my otherness and my status as a minority, which is a strange and foreign term because, you know, that's how we're seen and referred to here in the US. But since I was born and raised in the Philippines, I didn't start out with that awareness and that consciousness that I'm a marginalized person. And so, if I may, I'm gonna cite a quote from the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Sympathizer, who himself is Vietnamese.
Yes.
And he wrote, "Writers from minority write as if you are the majority. Do not explain, do not cater, do not translate. Do not apologize. Assume everyone knows what you are talking about as the majority does. Write with all the privileges of the majority, but with the humility of a minority." And that's been my approach to my own work, in that I feel that my story and my perspective and my vision is valid and does not have to be dumbed down or compromised in any way. And I hope that Filipinx creators feel the same way about their own work, and that they don't feel they have to pander and compromise it so that it appeals to an invisible majority, when we can be our own majority. And if we have the swagger and the bravado to believe in our own vision and our own talent and ingenuity.
By the way, I have a couple of more questions, but for anybody watching, please send us your questions. And we've gotten a couple of really good questions that I'm going to ask to both of you. But if you're watching, if you have a question, this would be a good time to share that. And let me just also give a shout out. Thank you for shouting out Viet. I'm a huge fan of Viet Thanh Nguyen, who's an incredible writer. But then it was also incredibly encouraging and humbling to see Ava DuVernay champion both of your films. I actually sent an email to her over the weekend because I was just like, I saw the tweet that she said about Diane, and of course Array Films picked up Lingua Franca, and to have this, Black American woman filmmaker icon championing Filipinx work, it's just incredible. We talk a lot about intersectionality, but it's harder to kind of put it into practice, and it's just amazing, kind of that leadership, right? What does that felt like for both of you to be supported, by this incredible artist, Isabel, and then Diane?
Yeah, it was a dream definitely to have Lingua Franca acquired by Ava, and it means so much to me personally because this is a woman who is a true maverick. She got her start outside Hollywood, and she's created opportunities for herself, and now is creating opportunities for underrepresented voices and filmmakers. And Array, her distribution collective, what also I'm very impressed about is that, it's not just acquiring the works of minority filmmakers for the sake of diversity and representation, but these are works that have a really daring, brazen, and original vision. And, we talked about the Criterion Collection as raising a certain type of film to be part of the cinematic canon. And I feel like with the choices that Ava and Array have made in acquiring films like Burning Cane, Zudu, very recently also premiered at Venice, and Lingua Franca, Ava is creating a bold new alternative American canon that doesn't center the experience of white cisgender Americans. And that's why I'm very, very proud that Lingua Franca is part of the Array roster in that regard.
Diane?
Yeah, I think there's not a female filmmaker out there who doesn't admire Ava DuVernay. She has single-handedly championed so many of my friends even by giving them work, by championing their films. And she is such a voice and advocate for the, I don't even want to say it, but, underrepresented filmmakers. And she took her platform and put her money where her mouth is. So for her to shout me out, she screened Yellow Rose at the Array Theater and opened it up for free for the Filipino community to come out, because the Array headquarters are located in historical Philippine town.
Yeah.
So she wanted to give back to the community and did a free screening of my film for our community. And if that doesn't scream class and true representation and intersectionality and helping each other out, I don't know what does. I will say a little kind of cool note. is she introduced my first film, Brooklyn Boheme, at its premiere at Urban World. So she introduced it, and I met her there all those years ago. So she's been sort of part of my world since then. And
That's
Spike
awesome.
Lee and Chris Rock and all those people were at that screening, along with Mario Van Peebles and Melvin Van Peebles and all of these extraordinary people. And so the African American community has always been very supportive of me and my work. And so it's kind of the definition of, I even have a company called Black Apino Productions, which is the company that we created to make Brooklyn Boheme. So
Yeah.
Again, I think, you know, this idea of intersectionality is another way that we as filmmakers can help each other and raise each other up.
Totally. Absolutely. So we are actually getting a few questions, but before I go to the questions, I have to ask both of you. And again, please, Lingua Franca, it's on Netflix now. I'm planning to do like an actual socially distanced screening over at my house here in Berkeley. And then this weekend, we're going to do a screening. We're going to buy out, I'm buying out a screening of Yellow Rose in here in the Bay Area. So please tune out for that. So Yellow Rose is in theaters now. Check it out. What's next for both of you? What are you working on now? And like, what's next? Isabel, let me go to you first.
I'm actually writing the pilot for a TV series that was picked up by a cable network 2 months ago. So it's very exciting.
Yay.
Worked in TV before, so that was my first pitch and my first TV project. And I also just finished the draft for my fourth feature called Tropical Gothic. It's my most ambitious one. It's set in the 16th century, in 1570, in the Philippines, which is very early during the Spanish regime. And it's a riff from Hitchcock's Vertigo. And as of yesterday, I'm very excited. I'm not able to really announce it yet, but I'm going to be wrapped by one of the major talent agencies, and they're going to help package and put the financing together for Tropical Gothic. So I'm really
amazing. That's awesome. Okay, well, I can't wait which agency that is. Diane and I, thankfully, are also with UTA. I love UTA, and Diane, I'm so glad you're with UTA. So what's next for you, Diane?
Yeah, so I am also writing a script, which is called Lizards, and it is a pop music opera set in World War II during Japanese occupied Manila, and it follows the journey of a young girl who has a magical lizard, and she eventually becomes a guerrilla in the war. So it's sort of this audacious, magical realism pop opera. I'm writing it in operatic structure as well, and writing some of the music. So it's very ambitious. And I'm very excited about it. It's sort of stretching another type of film that I love. And then I'm attached to 2 other features with Eric Feig at Picture Start, and Scooter Braun is producing. And that's a sort of star-crossed lovers in the vein of Normal People. And then I'm attached to another film with Atlas Entertainment, who did Wonder Woman and Suicide Squad and American Hustle. And it's a 2 women lovers go on a crime spree across America, kind of like a Thelma and Louise or True Romance or Bonnie and Clyde, if it was 2 badass women.
I love that everything that y'all are working on is, again, you know, you're not repeating yourselves, you're challenging yourselves, you keep moving forward. That's amazing. And I think that right there is a definition of what an artist is supposed to be and what's supposed to strive for. So that's amazing. Okay, we got lots of questions. So I'm gonna go through as many of them as I can. Okay, I'm gonna start with question from Donna May Fonda. I can only imagine there were a number of challenges throughout production. Is there a single thing, image, quote that you think of that would help you to get back on your feet and keep moving forward? Good question, Donna May. Who wants to take that?
Isabel?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for me, as an independent filmmaker with my first 3 features, I just learned not just to accept, but to embrace the difficulties and challenges of working on a small production. And I think of myself as a problem solver. And
Mm.
I'm excited, strangely enough, when there are curveballs and like challenges on set, because it allows me to be truly resourceful and creative and find a solution. So that one, my first 3 features have all been shot in 16 days or less. And that kind of pressure of finishing a film with a certain budget and schedule, I think has really brought out the best in me as a filmmaker and in the hats that I wore in making the film.
Great. I'm going to go to Vanessa Avocado.
Oh, okay.
What practical, and maybe Diane, this is for you. What practical technical advice do you have for young Filipinx who want to learn filmmaking but can't afford film school? How do you find your collaborators?
Well, you heard here, neither of us went to film school.
Yep.
And I know I just got a shitty camera, and nowadays you have this and you can make a movie on that.
Tangerine was filmed on like iPhone 6 or 5 or something like that. It's an amazing film.
Exactly. Yeah. I think my advice is just go out and start making it. Whatever it is, and if it's bad, that's okay. And it's probably going to be bad in the beginning.
Yeah.
But just make stuff and keep making it until you find your voice. And there will always be collaborators. You just put it out into the universe, tweet out, hey, I'm in Bed-Stuy right now, and I need, 3 dudes to come down and help me. And believe me, people will come. I mean, depending on where you live, actually anywhere in the country, people are making stuff. So, I think put the energy out there and it'll come back to you. But now more than ever, almost everyone knows how to film something and shoot something. And, find my film, Brooklyn Boheme, was about finding your creative community, about being with like-minded artists who push each other and challenge each other and create a community of creators.
And by the way, since we are among filmmakers, let me just shout out, like, if you want to learn about filmmaking, watch Matthew Libatek's films, where Matthew Libatek is the DP, an incredible filmmaker who's Filipino. Please check him out. So this is for both of you. From Chris Makahilig. See, this is when you know you're among Filipinos. Chris Makahilig, of course. I love that. What is your message to writers who want to create works in a time where Hollywood, the film industry, is focused on franchise stories like Crazy Rich Asians and To All the Boys I've Ever Loved? So yeah, what is the message to writers who want to create works outside of that franchise kind of, system right now? Isabel and then Diane.
It's really just a matter of you taking the plunge and putting out original stories and original work. When we think about it, the franchises that we think of, that Hollywood is supposedly making came from original ideas, that broke rules and really tried something new and different. And that's how we can really distinguish ourselves as filmmakers. And our perspective is that we really have to show Hollywood the stories that only we can come up with and that they can.
Diane?
Yeah, and I think, the whole point of independent cinema is to not make those movies. And there is an infrastructure out there, and there's more outlets than ever who are voracious for new voices. The number one show on HBO is I May Destroy You, which is the pure work of complete and total vision of one person. And it's the most popular thing. So I don't think, Fleabag is another example, or, I think the more you lean into what makes you unique as a voice, the more people will want you in Hollywood. That is actually true. Those movies you're talking about are constructs of a system that is corporate.
Yeah.
And they're not, the Scorsese made that controversial remark that, Marvel movies aren't cinema.
Oh yeah.
I'm one of those people that agree with him but it doesn't mean those movies aren't movies. It's
They're
just that
movies, but they're not cinema.
They're not cinema, and there's not a moral distinction between the two. But some people want to make Crazy Rich Asians and aspire to that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But there is this other side that is cinema, and there is financiers for it. There are people that want that, and what's heartening is that more and more of the appetite of even mainstream America wants unique visions. And those tend to be the things that do well now. So,
and let me just say, I thought what was interesting too is you both wrote and directed these films, and I'm reminded probably my favorite immigrant writer director is Billy Wilder, right?
yeah.
Who started directing his own films because he didn't want directors to screw with his writing, right?
Yeah.
And there's actually, if you're like a cinephile like I am, there's a great speech that Billy Wilder made when he received the Thalberg Award of the Oscars, where he actually thanked the guy at the immigration office for giving him papers. And when he answered, the guy asked him, "What do you do?" And he's like, "I write movies." And the guy said to him, "Well, just make good movies."
Yeah.
And stamp the visa to allow him to stay legally in the United States. And he said that comment kept him going. Just, I'm here to write good movies. Okay, I'm going to take a couple of more questions. Great question from Mark Morin. This is for both of you. Who is the one person who has inspired you the most that is not a filmmaker? Good question. Isabel?
Can it be an actress? Okay.
Yes.
She's actually an actor and activist, and that's Jane Fonda.
Okay, by the way, Isabel, I'm gonna make this happen. We're gonna contact in Jane Fonda's camp, and you gotta go do something with her. So Jane Fonda for you would be that, because Clute is like definitive for you, correct? Like the movie Clute.
Definitely. And also, in the early 70s, when she had her epiphany, and that she wanted to really become more involved politically in what is going on in the US at that time. And that also dictated and influenced the choice of roles and projects that she took on.
Yeah.
That had some political gravitas and meaning to her. And in the 70s, she had a string of films that is unparalleled in terms of the quality, from Clute, Coming Home, Julia, and
they shoot horses, don't they?
Shoot horses.
Don't they?
Yeah. Also, I think her character in Clute, which came out in 1971, it's really eye-opening for me, and it's such a modern construction of a female character and a sex worker, and that it's so layered and complex and nuanced, and that's influenced how I write my main protagonists and make female characters in my own films.
Yeah,
like Olivia, who is not perfect and is flawed, but is fully fleshed out and three-dimensional.
I highly recommend, by the way, there's a great documentary on Jane Fonda on HBO called Jane Fonda in 5 Acts. It's an amazing documentary. Check it out. Diane, who is a person that inspires you who's not a filmmaker?
I'm going to go super Filipino corny here. My mom. And the reason is she is an artist, but she was a doctor. And when I started to show interest in painting or music, instead of discouraging me, they put a piano in my bedroom. They bought me an easel and put it next to the bed. They made me show my paintings and discuss it at the dinner table, and she would read poetry that she had written and we would talk about it. And she was a cinephile. We watched Kurosawa movies as a family. She's a big fan of David Lynch. She's just sort of this maverick, brilliant, sort of like modern day female Jose Rizal, like just an incredible woman that encouraged my creativity. And growing up in a time that really didn't encourage being an artist, she did so much to encourage me and support me. And if I have any original bone in my body, it's because my mother nurtured that and fed my creativity. And
okay, she's gonna have to.
yeah.
She's gonna have to give a Zoom meeting about this, Diane, because like maybe she could give a seminar. Because all the parents who are telling us to be nurses and doctors and accountants, like she should.
Yeah.
She should give one. What is her
There's
name,
a
by the
scene
way?
in Dr. Magdalena Paragas. She, I dedicate the film to her and my daughter, and both of them. And the scene in the movie where the mom comes in, she's playing the guitar, and you think she's going to be like, you need to study. She actually laughs and embraces her and tells her that she's a wonderful singer. That's my little tip to the hat to my mother, and to all parents, to all Filipino parents specifically, to circle completely back to the beginning of our conversation. Art is a viable career. It is a rich life that is better than no other life I can imagine. And in this era and time, it's something you should encourage in your kids. It makes a difference when you encourage that. And I do that with my own daughter now.
I'm going to take one last question because we're supposed to check out, but this is a really good question from Jeremiah Abraham, our friend Jeremiah. Did you receive any feedback or comments during development from Hollywood to try to make your films to appear more mainstream, to appeal to more mainstream audiences? How did you take or reject that feedback to keep the story as authentic as possible? This is for both of you. Isabel?
For me, there were two specific instances. One, we had a potential investor who wanted me to take the narrative to a different direction, in that he wanted to see episodes and scenes of physical violence against a trans woman, which has become a lazy trope in films featuring trans women becoming, romantically involved with cisgender men. And I didn't want to take the film in that direction. And the second one was, we actually did have a production company partner who, once they saw the rough cut of the film, and especially the ending, which is subdued and quite ambiguous, they hated it because it's so different from Filipino films that tend to be melodramatic and just obvious, and you tie up the conflict very neatly at the end of it. But I stuck to my conclusion in the film, so it was very vindicating when 2 months later we got the email from Venice saying that they've chosen the film, and we had a road there. So
that's great. Diane?
Well, I think early on it was to change the race of the lead character to Chinese or Mexican or some other race. And I could get funded right then and right there if I did that. And, not to say that though that wouldn't have made a valid movie. It just wasn't the movie I wanted to make. And that's why it took me so long. But once the film was actually done, we had a screening for investors and some EPs. And one of the comments was, can't you make your lead protagonist more nice? And the answer was no. And, that was just playing into that, why does she have to be so talking back to her mom and all that? I said, because she's going through some shit and she's a smartass and she is a little shit as a character. So she's going to not be so nice in that situation. So that was the other one.
Before I take it back to Jess, one of the people that I am inspired by, who's not a filmmaker, is Toni Morrison. And I think after watching both of these films, there's this great quote where Toni Morrison says, narrative is radical, creating us at the very moment it is being created. And I think both of these films are radical films, right? Because you create your own worlds, right? And you are creating us as you've created them. So thank you for that. As a Filipino writer and a filmmaker, I am so proud to be in company with both of you. And I can only imagine how many Filipino filmmakers, young people watching saying, yes, I can do it because they did. So thank you for that. And thank you again to Cape for hosting this wonderful conversation. Jess?
Hi, thank you so much for that amazing, insightful conversation. I am really grateful to Jose, Diane, and Isabel for being so open, vulnerable, and sharing your experiences with us. Please check out their films if you have not. They are amazing. What a great way to celebrate Filipino American Heritage Month. Before we close out, I just do want to remind everyone that CAPE is a 501c3 nonprofit, so I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you to consider a donation. You can give at capeusa.org/donate, so we can keep doing amazing programs like this. Keep it free, keep it accessible for everybody. If you can't, please take our survey. It's totally free, it's anonymous, and that really helps us with grants, funding, sponsorships, and all that other fun bureaucratic stuff. But just it's like very quick 5 minutes. And we have more in this series for Filipino Heritage Month. So next History Month, apologies. So next week we'll have another panel with really interesting emerging FilAm queer short filmmakers. They're gonna be your new favorite filmmakers in a few years, and I'm so excited to talk about them and the work they've done. You can find out more. Follow us. We haven't dropped the link live to RSVP, but you can follow us at CAPE USA across our social media to learn more and get updates. Again, thank you so much. Please stay safe out there. Stay sane inside. Please register to vote and vote early or vote by November 3rd. But otherwise, have a great night. Thank you so much again for tuning in.